So I'm Tim Prudhomme. I'm a technical consultant at FHIR, and I work with Smart on FHIR mostly on the server side with FHIR's FHIR server and authorization server. Feedback. Okay. And we have Max.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. My name is Maximilian Nussbaumer. I'm a technical consultant with FHIR too. And I'm very happy to be here today to present this highly interesting topic to you. In fact, it's one of my favorite topics. And of course, I'm unable to fully represent Josh Mandel, but he recently became a father. So I wish you, on his behalf, a great time at DevDays. So let's start with the agenda. Today we are seeing in what is Smart on FHIR, in case you haven't heard of it before. We will look what it's like to set up a client for Smart on FHIR app flows. And we will also look into digital identity and SSO. But not only the client side is interesting for us at FHIR, we also look into the server side and what it means to provide our customers or like companies, organizations with infrastructure supporting Smart on FHIR. Last but not least, we will look into the future perspectives.
Okay.
Yes. Right, so Smart on FHIR stands for Substitutable Medical Applications and Reusable Technologies, in case you haven't heard of it yet. And its main purpose is to launch applications quickly in the healthcare sector. So there are two app launch flows defined, which is the EHR app launch as well as the standalone app launch. Aside from this, there are backend services which are used if some app is not being used by a user interface, but yeah, as said, in a backend service. On this graph, you see basically a visualization, very superficial one, but it should give you an overview of the few actors working with Smart on FHIR. So Smart on FHIR is actually in the version 2 currently, about for almost 4 years already, I guess. So they have, on the right side, you see the visualization got more dense, because there were new experimental features added to the Smart on FHIR specification. Smart on FHIR is essentially building up onto the OpenID standard as well as the OAuth 2 standard. And its main purpose still remains the same. You register a client, you set up an identity provider, and then you can start implementing your app using Smart on FHIR open source libraries and or FHIR implementation guides for being able to process your data. Here on the right side, you see a little bit of the new features, which are mostly experimental, like parameters for improved security, for improved access on specific FHIR data that you are meant to access with Smart on FHIR, like granular scopes and a certain FHIR context. And also, we have recently heard about CDS hooks a lot. They are strongly focused by the Smart Health IT department recently. And now I will show you what this means on the client side.
Yeah.
So in Europe, we don't have yet too many Smart on FHIR clients. We do have quite some of them, but I would say the majority of Smart on FHIR clients being used are in the US. Because in order to use a standard, you need regulations supporting that standard. Otherwise, the providers, software manufacturers, will not implement it. So in the US, they have mandated it quite in different laws now. So for both healthcare providers and healthcare payers, they must support at least Smart version 1, and now also, going to be soon, Smart version 2 support for fine-grained scopes. And in the International Patient Access IG implementation guide, which is based on Smart on FHIR, we might hear a lot more in the future, because in Europe, we look at this development with great curiosity. Right, but my colleague Tim is actually from the States, so for him it's much easier to tell you what it's like in the States using Smart on FHIR when there's a lot of regulations supporting it already.
Yeah. Right, and before I do that, I do want to share a quick example of a personal health app that uses Smart on FHIR. This isn't from our work with FHIR, but it's something that I wanted to share because these are screenshots from my phone showing some of my real health records in Apple Health that I pulled from my local hospital. And this shows a real blood pressure reading I took, which was sent to me as a FHIR observation resource from Epic's MyChart. And a cool thing to notice here is that Apple included a button to show the raw FHIR JSON data, which is definitely something that users don't need to see, but really demonstrates that I have access to the real discrete data, which I can easily export and load into any other FHIR-based app. And you can imagine being able to send data back to the hospital or to other providers this way, as well as connecting this FHIR data to other mobile apps that integrate with Apple Health, like for nutrition or for exercise. So this really lays the technical foundation for patients to be able to track their own preventative health care. And by the way, there's a talk this Thursday on using Smart on FHIR for mobile apps. So going back to the, there we go. Going back to the server side of Smart on FHIR, or servers that are set up for specific clients, I want to talk about another important real-life use case that maybe isn't as glamorous as some of the user-facing smart apps you may have seen. And for that reason, I won't bore you with a demo of it. But this is for backend services for moving data with bulk export. So from an OAuth perspective, these are confidential clients, meaning no user login is required, using system-level scopes, shorter access tokens, and asymmetric. Does that sound okay? Okay. Using asymmetric authentication, basically more secure because a client's secret isn't exchanged. So why is this important? Why is bulk export in FHIR so important? Well, this enables patients to be able to access all of their data in a standard format. It enables healthcare providers to more easily switch their health IT systems. So this is another sense of the word substitutable, which is the S in SMART, meaning substitutable data storage. And this is why, at least in the US, certified EHRs have been required to support this since 2024. And they will be required to support SMART v2 by the end of this year. Another important use case is for exporting data from healthcare payers to healthcare providers, as well as to other payers. And this really shows how Smart on FHIR can support the key infrastructure for moving data behind the scenes. Because the reality is, Smart on FHIR will never be used beyond demo apps unless it's supported by the sources of data, in this case, healthcare providers and healthcare payers. So, at least in the US, that's why all federally regulated insurance plans will be required to support this in 2027. For example, in the CMS Provider Access API, this will enable providers to get data about patients that they have a treatment relationship with in the context of some payer insurance contract. And we can see how Smart v2 could be relevant here for the fine-grained scopes. So this involves using FHIR group resource to represent that patient-provider relationship in the context of a certain payer. And providers can be granted access to patient data based on matching identifiers of a group. So you can see here, there's an example of a version 2 fine-grained scope, which uses a NPI number, and this grants read access to a group based on that matching identifier, which would be assigned to a client. And this can be used to restrict the scope of a group export. This comes from the DaVinci member attribution IG, if you're curious to know more about that. And then going a little beyond bulk export, we expect providers will want to reconcile which patients are attributed to them by payers in those group resources. And so that's why the DaVinci PDEX IG has suggested a V2 scope for being able to update those groups at the bottom there. So you can maybe see the little U, meaning update. So again, why does this matter in the real world? Well, this use case is really intended to support value-based care, where providers are paid based on the total health outcomes of patients, and therefore need to keep track of which patients a payer attributes to them. So these are the use cases we've spent a lot of time on at FHIR because they support a wider system of healthcare exchange, and for that reason will be required in the US. And if you'd like to know more about this, I have a talk about this on Friday called Implementing the Patient-Provider Access APIs. And by the way, I know there's a lot of information on here, but you should have the slides in Whova. So switching back to user applications, I want to talk briefly about how to control access for specific users. In particular, if a user is a patient, you want to limit their access to only their health records. And there really is 3 essential parts for doing this. The first is to uniquely identify the user. Second, uniquely identify the health record. And third, connect the user to the health record. And I realize these are not good examples of unique identifiers, but I wanted to keep it simple. So Smart on FHIR specifies the FHIR user claim, OIDC claim, to do this. And the FHIR user claim assigned to a user should correspond to the logical ID of a FHIR patient resource. And that user should be granted access to the resource only if these match. So then how do they get access to other related data, such as encounters and claims data, medications, and so forth? For this, we use the patient compartment resource, which defines a set of resource types that the patient resource is related to through references. And if a user has access to a patient record, then they should also have access to those other related resources that are in the patient compartment. So that's great, but how do you use this with an existing user system that wasn't built for FHIR? Well, that's where single sign-on comes in. And one way to implement single sign-on is with the OpenID Connect standard. That also happens to be mandated for payers and for certified EHRs used by providers. But since your SSO users aren't coming from a FHIR-based system, they probably will not have identifiers associated with them that correspond to FHIR resources. So one solution is to create a mapping from their identifiers to this FHIR user claim. For example, like a member ID. You could also tag the FHIR data with those custom identifiers and grant access to it with a custom V2 scope. Finally, I'll mention some topics that are relevant to Smart on FHIR in the near future. The first is that we expect it to play a role in digital identity initiatives, especially for national directories and international exchange. I suggest looking at the work of the FAST Accelerator program. And by the way, I updated this slide. It's not in Whova, just make a note of that, FAST, as well as the eHealth digital service infrastructure here in the EU, which may be related eventually to the International Patient Summary and Access IGs, and then using it as well in clinical decision support use cases, such as for the prior authorization API in the US, and who could forget AI-driven smart apps and agents. Right? A little bit of a delay there. There we go. So some support for Smart on FHIR is growing with the help of government mandates. Smart V2 flexibility, those fine-grained scopes will enable advanced use cases. Single sign-on is pretty critical. And more generally, digital federated identity will be even more important in the future. And you can reach us here if you have any questions, but as well as right now. So thank you.
Is there any question? I see there is already one. I can already ask. Does the V2 requirement for US compliance mostly lean on EHR providers?
Yeah, well, I'll go back to this slide. So certified EHRs will be required to support V2. Payers, it's recommended for payers. It's not required yet. Yeah, I think that answers the question. But correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone else knows. Oh.
Maybe I would go over the WUVA first.
Okay.
So I read it. How does bulk export OAuth address the access to the ND-JSON URLs? Is the expectation that the same backend OAuth creds used to launch a UT export are used to retrieve these? It's a long question.
I believe so. So the same credentials are used to trigger the bulk export and then to also download it. I believe those are the same. I know in the PDEX IG, they're saying you should use separate credentials for, well, this is a different use case for doing like a member match and then getting data after matching members. But yeah. Yep.
So there is a third one, and maybe we will get to your question. Does V2 support giving access to only a subset of a patient data, as in not the whole compartment, but instead individual resource collection or based on a filter-like profile?
Yeah, this is a good question. So the V2 scopes are basically the same as FHIR API search queries. So in theory, just about anything you can do with a FHIR search query, you can put into a scope. So it's very flexible. Yep.
Okay. I think there were one person.
Thanks, great presentation. Mikael Rinnemäki from Finland. What do you tell people who say that Smart on FHIR or Smart App Launch is not secure enough? So I work on IPA, Standard International Patient Access. My standard answer is that, hey, it's been used in US for years and there haven't been any major breaches, and all the major EHR vendors have put millions into making it secure enough, but still there's sometimes, no, it's not secure enough. We need to do our own security mechanism on top of that. So what are your most convincing arguments saying that it is secure enough?
Right. It's a good question, because I've also heard some people say it's like too complicated, which, you know, it also needs to be secure, right? So, so there are a couple of like extra features that it recommends, like using Pixie and, you know, reference tokens and all of these other things you can add on to make it even more secure, apart from the use cases, apart from like the mandatory requirements. I think maybe you also asked in Huva about, oh, okay, someone else asked about mutual TLS, and that's something that can also be used. It's referenced in the PDEX IG. Yeah. So.
Last question here.
Yeah.
Yes. No? Okay.
12:30.
I think we are on time, so...
Nice. One more.
So, sure.
Yeah, I was just looking at your answer about the mutual TLS, and you say it's planned for the DaVinci for the endpoint discovery. So does that mean that MTLS will only be used for the endpoint discovery?
No, it's about the MTLS endpoints being discovered. So you will use MTLS for the connection between untrusted like systems with a how to say
System
lack
to
of trust.
system.
Oops, sorry for that.
Yeah, but not just for the directory itself or the discovery service or whatever you call it. But
in the current IG of PDEX, it's already supported. I think DaVinci PDEX, right? It's an American IG, so I'm not too much into them, but it's already supported the MTLS connection. But in the future, it will include the fast. What was it standing for, right? To not only have an MTLS connection, but also have a discovery based on the fast tool. a possibility to quickly retrieve the endpoints, but they're still being used with the MTLS connection.
Yeah.
Okay, so then in the US, the MTLS will be a requirement. Is that the
No. But it's an option. But I mean,
It's an
this is
option.
beyond the scope of Smart on Fire. So
Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay. Thanks anyway.
I suggest you can also follow back and then check.
Yeah.
But no, I will call the session to an end. Thank you for attending, and then see you later for us.